point number 21.
And now here's the point about doubting Thomas. I don't have to refute him. I'll let the Trinitarian scholar himself, Michaelis, in Concessions of a Trinitarian, he himself writes, I do not affirm Thomas passed at all once from the extreme doubt, Thomas was extremely doubtful, to the highest degree of faith and acknowledged Christ to be the true God. This appears to me too much for then the existing knowledge of the disciples. And we have no intimation that they recognize the divine nature of Christ before the outpouring of the Holy Spirit. I am therefore inclined to understand this expression which broke out in the height of his astonishment in figurative sense, denoting only who I shall ever revere in the highest degree. This is a Trinitarian scholar.
Now this is neat. Sami dismisses the proclamation of the Apostle Thomas in John 20 verse 28 because Thomas doubted the report of the other apostles. But the fact is, he simply can't deal with the text and therefore resorts to some scholar to try to appeal to authority. Now notice the astonishing reasoning here. Sami seems to think that we can't trust doubting Thomas, who was an eyewitness to the facts, walked with the Messiah for years, and whose proclamation was personally blessed by the Messiah himself. Yet for some reason, Sami thinks that doubting scholar will suffice. He disregards doubting Thomas, then goes to doubting scholar, who is miles removed, who is 2,000 years removed, whose personal opinion is not shared by the overwhelming number of Trinitarian scholars, and whose opinion is a direct contradiction to the blessing of the Messiah. And he thinks that that scholar bears enough authority to convince us that John 20 verse 28 is not a proclamation of faith by Thomas that can be regarded as true. Based on what? Logic. What Sami should have done is not just quote the scholar, but to show us how our interpretation and understanding of Thomas's proclamation misses the mark. Evidently, he doesn't do so because he can't do so. Thomas's exclamation cannot be understood in any other way than that he declared Yeshua to be his Lord and his God. Point 22.
Go to Luke chapter 24, verse 19-21. What did the disciples say about Jesus? They said Jesus was a prophet. This is right after he died, when they were walking and they meet the traveler who was Jesus. They mistook him. What did they say? He was a prophet. And they said, we thought he was going to help us, but he's dead, etc. This is right before Thomas did it. So even after Jesus is dead, before his appearance, they're saying this guy is a prophet, not God.
Sami then goes to Luke 24 to quote a text that undermines Islamic teachings about Yeshua. Let's look at the text, because again, we have to ask ourselves, how does the text fit into the Islamic agenda? Not only that Yeshua is divine, but the reason why he came. Now let's see what Luke 24 verse 19 through 21 say. What things, he asked. About Jesus of Nazareth, they replied. He was a prophet, powerful in word and deed, before God and all the people. The chief priests and our rulers handed him over to be sentenced to death, and they crucified him. But we had hoped that he was the one that was going to redeem Israel. And what is more, it is the third day since all this took place. Now, Sami is quoting verses that proclaim the by-crucifixion of the Messiah and thinks this helps the Islamic cause. If you want to know what the first believers believe, this is it. How desperate. And this is what the text goes on to say. In addition, some of our women amazed us. They went to the tomb early this morning, but didn't find his body. They came and told us that they had seen a vision of angels who said he was alive. Then some of our companions went to the tomb and found it just as the women had said, but him they did not see. He said to them, how foolish you are, and how slow of heart to believe all that the prophets have spoken. Did not the Christ have to suffer these things and then enter his glory? Now, since Muslims are Jesus only advocates, these are the words of Yeshua himself. He declares that the Messiah was to suffer death and then rise from the dead before entering into his glory. So the very text Sami sought refuge to in order to affirm his position turned out to be his undoing. This does not fit the Islamic version of Yeshua. Period. Point 23.
Why would a monotheistic Jew preach this? I'll give an easy answer. Why? Well, let's read Mark chapter 8, verse 17 to 18. While Jesus was alive, Jesus told them, "Why do you reason? Because you have no bread. Do you perceive not? Do you not understand? Have your heart hardened? Having eyes, have you not seen? And having ears, have you not heard? Do you not remember?" So even while his disciples are alive, Jesus is saying, you look at me, you see what's going on, and you still don't understand. Imagine when Jesus is gone, how much worse their misunderstanding is going to get. In Mark chapter 9, 17 to 19, Jesus gets extremely angry at them. "How long shall I be with you?" he tells his disciples. "How long shall I suffer with you? Bring him on to me," the blind man who they couldn't heal. So they're not actually reliable, because even in the time of Jesus, they never understood anything. What about when Jesus is gone?
Of course, Sami is in a dilemma when he makes this claim. Sami claims that the disciples didn't even understand what Yeshua said while he was with them, let alone when he would leave them. This, of course, is again selective citing of sources, because that's all Muslims have. I understand. But before I address him from the New Testament, let's look at the dilemma that he raises for himself and his religion when he claims such nonsense. According to the Quran and his scholars, the original disciples would become uppermost and prevail over their enemies. But how could they have ever become uppermost over their enemies when the disciples had no clue when he was with them, and especially when he would leave them? And if they were of no use, then the Islamic Isa, with the help of Allah, picked a bunch of incompetent disciples to represent them in the world, declaring their Islamic version of Yeshua to be a complete failure. Unless his entire goal was to fail, then he would have been successful, albeit in failing, which has been my point on the Islamic Isa all along. He is a miserable figure, not worthy of admiration or honor. Now to the New Testament. Yeshua educated them between his resurrection and his ascension into heaven. Furthermore, he has declared that they would be brought to the complete truth by his replacement, the true Comforter, the Holy Spirit. So much for the disciples not discerning his message and misunderstanding everything he said to them, and thus being hopelessly ignorant. Point number 24.
So they're not actually reliable, because even in the time of Jesus, they never understood anything. What about when Jesus is gone? Secondly, did the disciples actually believe he was God? Acts chapter 2, verse 22. "Ye men of Israel, hear these words. Jesus of Nazareth, a man approved of God." Acts chapter 3, verses 13. "The God of Abraham and of Isaac, Jacob, the God of our fathers, and his glorified Son, Jesus." Not the God of our fathers, Jesus. Notice the distinction. And I could go on and on.
Sami then runs to Acts 2 and Acts 3, and again Sami appeals to texts that don't help Islam one bit. The disciples believed that Yeshua was a prophet. So what? Just as every Christian ever since believed, and still do Christians believe, that Yeshua was a prophet. But they also believe the following. Again, Sami has to account for the disciples believing whatever they believed of Yeshua. And how does this fit the Islamic agenda or the Islamic version of Isa? I don't know, but let's look at the text. Follow me.